All right. Um, so the big thing with Excel is that it's a very like common tool, um, and a lot of people flock to it, which is amazing. But there are a lot of limitations that we find, especially as we go higher into data protocols. Um, when we're working with tools like Bayes and Grid, there becomes a lot of limitations in what we can actually do in Excel. So we got to think of a way that we can move away and use different tools to better our work. So a little bit about me. I've worked on 6 official teams since 2022, and um, I've seen a lot of success and a lot of mistakes, and I've learned a lot with my time. For my programming history, I started with basic HTML and CSS in 2019. And then I've worked my way up through React and Svelte to where I am now. I've worked with a bunch of different database technologies, the different like web technologies. And then I started programming with Python in about 2021. And then I first used the Riot and Leap PD APIs in 2022. And ever since then, I've been increasing throughout the whole data suite, if you will, for League of Legends. For education, this is my first year at Winthrop. I'm doing a Bachelor's of Arts in Data Science with a minor in Applied Physics. And everything I've learned about programming has been self-taught. And that's like, you don't need any money to self-teach yourself. For about 4 years, I've gone from basic HTML to what I'm building today. And you can do the same. So the pros and cons about moving from Excel to your web technologies is like there's quite a few of each, and they all have their different drawbacks. For pros, you have unlimited control of what you can display. You choose what data you want, how you want to like convey your message, when you want to convey it. And then like with Excel, you're limited to cell sizes in a grid format. So like squares, but with your own website, you can like choose however you want to display it, which allows unlimited control. And honestly, it makes for a lot more like you feel like you've built something. The next pro is that you don't have any data limitations. The servers that you use when you're building a tool on the web allow for megabytes of JSON to be processed in a second. And Sheets, it gets very like lengthy to process a lot of information, even if it's like static information, which is not really great. It still takes a very long time. With web technologies, you also have like a centralized hub for all your statistics. You can include solo queue stats, competitive stats, general league stats from around the world, and you can include a lot more than that, and it's very fast. Another thing that you can do is implement a ton of APIs. You can build your own APIs even to interact with your server and your database, which allows for extremely fast data reporting and on the fly like data or reporting, so like ad hoc reports. This can also be used in conjunction with Excel itself. If you have one tool that you really like in Excel, you can export your own server data from like your website or your web tool and then implement it into that Excel sheet. The other thing you can do is implement your APIs with like the Riot API and the Leap PD API in your own app. With Excel, you have to use an app script, which is kind of confusing to me, at least. I know it's just JavaScript, but I prefer to build it on my own and have access to run what I want, when I want, how I want. Another thing that you have with your own tools is you have a lot of vendor options. You have multiple free providers for everything that you need in a web dev app, whether it's a database, a styling, a ORM, an object relational mapper, even JavaScript frameworks. You have servers that you can deploy to, which have multiple free options. And Sheets is a monopoly. Like there's no other tool like Sheets except for Excel, but like Excel can't really easily be shared in the web. So Sheets is basically the only tool, and that has very limited add-ons that you can use. The next benefit for your own tool on the web is infinite scalability. Like the data limits that we were talking about, Excel gets very slow, very fast. And a web app can scale from 0 users to 1,000 users to 0 megabytes of data to gigabytes of data in your databases. And you can scale that however you want for free, or you can scale it with money as well. So you're not limited at all with your scaling. The next thing that you can also do is have multiple tools in the same project. For me, I have 3 sheets that I use to track team statistics, but with my web tools, I put them all in one. So for example, I track draft in one sheet, like objective fights in another, and then there's solo queue data and champion pools and all that in a third. So having all of those in one web app, it's a lot less hassle when you're making a new report, and it's a lot easier to share with others so they can see your data. And then the final pro, which I think is honestly the best pro, learning programming allows a lot more job opportunities, whether it's software development or data science or anything really that involves programming. You can use those tools that you learn in that field as well. I missed part. For the drawbacks, it's quite hard to learn. Programming is really, really hard, to be honest. It seems like, oh, this is something simple, but handling a project and handling all the tools that interact with it, it requires a lot of time and effort to learn, and you're not going to be able to learn it in like 6 months. Well, you might be able to learn it to a basic level in 6 months, but learning it to take advantage of all the benefits that you get from it, it'll take like a year to 2 years. I'm still learning, and I've been doing this for like 4 or 5 years now. So it's something that you're always gonna have to keep learning and always gonna have to continue improving yourself with. The other drawback that I find that is really frustrating is that it's very, very hands-on. You control literally every aspect of the application. Every minute aspect, every minute detail is going to be your responsibility, whether it's your schema, how you interact with the database, protecting your endpoints, or how the display looks, how it interacts with mobile devices versus desktop devices. If you want to implement that feature as well, you have to think about every single thing in the project, and it can get quite overwhelming. This is a kind of an issue, but for what I'm kind of presenting to the audience, it wouldn't really affect this, but there's a lot of potential security risks that you have with databases. You need to protect your environment variables, which are your keys, your API keys and all that. You need to protect your database schema from like SQL injections. You need to make sure that you're not leaking any data. So it can be quite a hassle, but it doesn't really become an issue until you build like public tools, and then it can be a little something you have to think about. The other thing, servers can be inconsistent. For example, I was dealing with an issue last week with Community Dragon being down, and it ruined half of my application. So this is something that can be solved with caching images and caching requests, but it is something that you have to think about. The only issue is when like a Vercel, which is your hosting application, that can go down, but that you can't really control. It's just a risk that you take. For vendors, for example, like Sheets, that's the monopoly there. Vercel is becoming the hosting monopoly. When these monopolies like actually create a monopoly, I'm using that word a lot, but when vendors create a monopoly over a certain aspect, they will likely start applying payments and subscriptions to their services. Planet Scale, which is my preferred database, it recently did that. It removed its free tier. So, like, you're gonna have to consider the possibility of needing to find new providers. Um, and while that can be a hassle, it's quite an easy fix. I moved my data from Planet Scale, which is MySQL, to Neon, which is PostgreSQL, in like 2 hours. So it's not that big of a deal, but it is something you have to think about. And then with monopolies, free options are slowly disappearing. Like Planet Scale, for example, the free tiers are becoming less and less available. I see Benjamin's typing, so I'll give it a second before I move on. Okay, cool. Here are some examples of some web dev tools. For example, these are all my tools, by the way. You can see a lot of graphs, and a lot of really certain statistics that you can't really get in Google Sheets. You can see that I'm tracking both solo queue, competitive, and player competitive stats all in one tool. Down here, you can see rankings, which is just statistics. You can see that we're tracking competitive pools in another tool. And this is Champions Queue, a tool I built for Champions Queue. Here we can see like tracking drafts and solo queue tools. And these are just very small examples of what you can use or what you can build with web dev. So for recommended tools, I have a lot here. Databases, I recommend Neon. That's my first recommendation. That's what I use in every single tool. It has very generous free tiers. The next one I would recommend is Supabase. It's also a really good tool. However, I've had troubles implementing authorization into it. They have their own authorization, and I simply don't understand it. So I lean towards Neon, where I can implement my own authorization. And then Planet Scale. I love Planet Scale. It's my favorite tool that I've used for databases so far. But there are no more free tiers, and I am committed to not spending a single dollar on any of my tools. Authorization. These are all for JavaScript because I don't develop Python in the web. I use Lucia for all of my tools. I actually switched from Next.js to SvelteKit because I couldn't get Auth.js to work, but there's a lot of people who have gotten it to work, so you can use that as well. And those are my 2 recommended tools for JavaScript. For buckets, so when I say bucket, I mean like a storage kind of thing for images and videos and files. I use Supabase as a storage. It is very easy to set up, and you don't actually need to use the database, the Supabase database. You can just use the bucket if you want, and that's what I use. If you want to use AWS S3, it is the paid version, but once again, I don't use paid tools. For styling your web dev styles, I use Tailwind CSS for everything. It implements really easily and really well with all of my tooling. I've seen Shade CN being used a lot, as well as Bootstrap. Bootstrap I see kind of phasing out, but it's very good for pre-built styles. With Tailwind CSS, if you want to use pre-built modules in your app, there's a framework called Skeleton that is it implements Tailwind CSS and SvelteKit to create its own framework, I'd say. For API handlers, the Riot API for JS that I use is Twisted. I really like how it's implemented, and the TypeScript version allows for like really easy typesetting. The same thing with Poro. That's the Leakpedia version. I don't use Leakpedia API too much on the web, but if you were building a tool that required it, I use Poro. For Python, I used Riot Watcher, it's called, for the Riot API. I know there's other versions like Cassiopeia that a lot of people like to use, but I prefer Riot Watcher. And then for Leakpedia API, I just used the one set up by the person who ran it, and they recommended using MW Client, MW Cleric, and MW Rogue. You can find it on Leakpedia documentation, I believe. For frameworks, once again, I only develop in JavaScript for the web, so I use SvelteKit. You can use it in JavaScript or TypeScript. I prefer to use TypeScript for everything. So that's my personal preference. Next.js is another framework that you can use. It's based on React. React is based on JavaScript and TypeScript. But I personally don't prefer React anymore. So I don't use it, but it's a very common tool. I think it's actually the most common tool in the industry, like the web dev industry. So it's very good to learn. Vue.js, also very good. It works with JavaScript and TypeScript as well. I personally, I've used it once. I'm a fan, but I prefer SvelteKit to it, so I don't use it. For Python, if you want to develop in Python for the web, you can use Django, which is, I've never used it, so I just know that it's popular. And then Streamlit, I've noticed it pop up actually a lot. I've never used it, but it looks like it's very easy to build Python applications for the web. So it's something they can look into if you prefer Python. For ORMs, which is how you can interact with your database without using raw SQL, I use Prisma. Prisma is preferred for me. It is so easy to work with for your schema, for your creating all your CRUD outputs. I love to use Prisma. So yeah, I think Prisma is the only tool that I'd ever use for that one, which is it's the best. I haven't seen anything else. And then charting is something that you're going to do a lot with your applications. I use Apex charts for JavaScript and TypeScript just because I personally find it to be the best. Chart.js is also really good. I feel like it's a bit more difficult to work with, specifically with SvelteKit. If I was using Next.js, I might switch to it. Heatmap.js, really good if you want to create heat maps on the web. It's something that I've recently discovered and I'm recently implementing into my applications. And then for Python, Matplotlib is easily the most used, probably the easiest to work with. I feel it's a little limited in the styling. And then Plotly, that's what I used to use before I got really into Matplotlib. For stacks, I recommend SvelteKit. I use Neon, Lucia, Supabase for my authorization and database interactions with Prisma. And then I use Tailwind for styling and Apex charts for charts with a Python backend. You can also use Next.js. I used to use Next.js, and I use Chakra UI which is a like pre-built style component library, um, and then everything else just remains the same. I personally think that this is the best to use, the least setup, but that's just my preference at least. Um, Moving on to learning resources, I find that it's really hard to learn, especially if you don't know how to start. So for me, I use the Coppinger. He's a New Zealand developer who just streams his work all the time. He's very open to asking questions, I found. And then Huntabyte on YouTube for Svelte at least. That he's where I learned most of my beginning Svelte, and I think he's really good at explaining concepts. Other web dev tools that I think are good for learning is Coding Garden. Really good at explaining web dev concepts and does a lot of tutorials on his YouTube and Twitch. And then Free Code Camp, just really good at programming for like Python. I haven't done any of their web dev stuff, but I know that their Python is good for basics. One other tool that I haven't used is, I think it's Web Dev Simplified on YouTube. They post like small projects they build, and I find it really useful for that. For repositories, Biora has a really good Ride API series on YouTube. That you can implement with a Prisma ORM and then upload it to a database if you want to take it a step further. Aurelia, I don't know how to say her name. So Flora, she has a really good LOL Analytics GitHub repository on GitHub with like a lot of resources in there. And then I will have an upcoming Svelte tutorial on YouTube eventually, hopefully within the next month or two. For free services, I think Neon's the best for Postgres. For servers, I think everything uses Vercel, at least Next.js and SvelteKit do. Really easy to implement and is free. And then for file buckets, I use Supabase. You can use AWS, but it's paid. For tips, you're going to struggle. Everything when you're learning, you're going to struggle. Just keep at it. A big one, don't get stuck in tutorial hell. This is when you keep just following tutorials on YouTube or following tutorials on like a website, and then you can't build anything on your own. I was actually stuck in tutorial hell for a while, and it's really hard to get out of. So try and get out of that as soon as you can. Build, which is the last one that I have. Just build whatever you think of. My third tip, I think it's really important to pick a stack and stick to it. To be honest, the differences between Next.js and SvelteKit aren't that big when it comes to the product. The building is obviously a lot different, but the final product doesn't really matter at all. Or like you can't really notice the difference. So just stick to one and then learn all of that. I think asking other coaches and other analysts' opinions, the scene is very closed off. You're not going to get a lot of public opinions. And I don't think you should publish your work to Twitter either, which is my next point. I'll explain that a little later. But asking like coaches that you know, analysts that you know, what they think, and then how they might implement something else is really useful to your own development. Like you might be really good at one aspect of the game, or you might be really good at like graphics and like making it look good. But if it's not functional or it doesn't function to a player or a coach, how they like take information in, then it is not a good product, no matter how good it looks or like how useful the information is. There needs to be a balance of both. If you can maximize both, that's obviously the best. But to do that, you need to get other people's opinions. I mentioned earlier, don't publish your work to Twitter. You can obviously do whatever you want. However, I found that it becomes like really a lot of people might like take some work from you, which is fine if you're fine with that. Personally, I am. I just do confidential work, so I can't post my stuff. But you need to make sure that Like, what sets you apart is what sets you apart. If you want to show your work, that's fine. As long as it's like not confidential, that's a big thing. Don't be scared to ask for help from others, specifically other analysts who might have experience with programming. There's a Discord called it's like the Lowell Analyst server, um, and anyone in there is willing to help. Anyone in there is willing to help. I'm sure a lot of people on Twitter are willing to help as well, and the community is, while it's really closed off and a lot of things aren't shared publicly, it's really like welcoming and willing to assist wherever they can. And then I think the final tip: when ready, implement more automation. Um, if you want to do manual work, that's fine. I really don't like doing manual work. It's not my favorite thing in the world at all. So I automate everything I do. But you shouldn't start with automating. You should start learning the basics, learning what a JSON output is, learning what an API request outputs, and then as you understand that, you can then implement like automating the API request or automating the JSON response. Whenever I start a new tool, even like a basic tool, I automatically, or the first thing I do will be write out what I want the JSON output to be. And then as I work through the project, then I automate the output to be that output, if that makes sense. And then what I think is the most important step: just try new things, try new tools. Once you're more like developed in the programming, then try new programming tools, try new databases, try new frameworks. There's endless capabilities as long as your imagination is there. And that's everything I have. So if anyone has any questions, now's your time. I went a bit over time, actually. At what scale do you recommend to move away from Sheets/Excel? Asking from the perspective of tier 3 terms such as Aegis, BOL, etc. My two biggest concerns is low to no cost and ease of management. I think that like it becomes an issue to work with Excel when you have like, for me, I don't like to work with Excel over like 2 teams, to be honest. I think 8 teams is the max. I'm gonna refer to your sheet specifically, the running the Rift one. That sheet is really hard to navigate. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but like it's hard to find any useful information for me specifically. Just because of the limitations of Excel. It's not like any fault of like whoever created it, but like Excel is super limited in how you can display the data, and the data display for like large amounts of data is just not good. I think that it becomes beneficial to move to, or I think it becomes less of a burden to move away from Excel at like 8 teams or like over 40 matches. As long as you know like what you're doing, you can honestly just create like multiple databases for each TO that you work with, and then that like removes the issue of interacting with random TOs. You have your own logins for each TO. You have your own database for each TO, which has their own matches and their own teams. And then if you want, you can have like your one big bucket, like Superbase bucket, to host all of your images, all of your replay files. I guess maybe not all of your replay files, but all of your images, and anything that you want for that. I hope that answers your question. Low to no cost. I don't think really cost is an issue, especially with what I said, having multiple databases. Um, I have like 10,000 solo queue games in one database right now, and it's not even like an eighth of the way. Um, so yeah, that answers the question. Hello, just arrived. VOD will be available. Yep, I'm recording. I don't think it'll be available on Twitch, but I'll upload it to YouTube. Do you have any other questions, or Benjamin's? Do you have any further questions from what I said? Not right now. Cool. I'll give it like maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. I love you. Thank you, Gary. I love you too. But yeah, I'm always willing to help anyone. Like if you need any help, I love to help people, and I think that I'm quite knowledgeable in this area. So um, I'd like to see other people. Thank you for the talk. No problem. Sorry if it was a little like mumble jumble. Um, I had a lot of topics I wanted to cover. How hard is it to get a data analyst spot in esports? It's actually quite hard. Iniro had a talk yesterday or 2 days ago, where he mentioned that if you get an opportunity to get to the top level and you don't take it, you're never going to have that opportunity again. And I think that is quite similar. I think that's easier for lower level teams, but like what I've just talked about today, it doesn't really apply until you get to like top ERLs. So like ERL 1 or like NACL plus, because what a lot of web dev tools, they're not really useful until you get like either a lot of data from the Riot API, which I don't like ERL2. I've only been in one ERL2, which is LFL2. They played on Tournament Realm, but they didn't have access to bays. So like you couldn't get any data from the matches. So I think that like it's really hard to get a job where you can showcase your skills, because you need to be in the top ERLs like Prime League, like LFL, Superliga, NLC, those leagues, Ultraliga, and there's only like so many spots that are available. So it kind of depends on what you want to do. If you really want to be not be good, but like if you want to have an opportunity where you can program or develop really fast, you need to really look and really like cold call people, because it is super hard, and opportunities are very scarce. So I hope that answers your question. It was a pretty long way to say that it's really hard. What's the best way to market yourself to teams? I'm still finding that out, to be honest. I think that having players vouch for you is probably the easiest. Or like publishing not what you're working on, but publishing like things that you're working on, if that makes sense. Like talk about what you're doing, but don't show what you're doing. It becomes a larger issue, or not a larger issue, but it becomes like easier to market yourself when you do that. And like a lot of people, like managers, don't know what data analysts do. A lot of coaches don't know what data analysts do too. It varies coach to coach. So like you need to promote your value as like a business project, not necessarily a team project, if that makes sense. Show how you can provide value to the organization rather than just a team, I believe. I believe that's the best way. Um, if you want to do scouting, just scouting, um, it's kind of just doing it. People talk. Is there a way for me to see the slides? Yeah, I'm gonna post them to Twitter. I don't know if I can post them anywhere in the Discord. I don't know how to do that. I'll ask Sheriff, but once I find out, I'll do that as well. One thing with the slides as well. Actually, I'll just share it in this call. One thing in these slides, on this one, so slide 5 and 6, in the speaker notes, I have links to every single tool that I talked about, as well as all the resources I've talked about. So you can look there if you ever just want a link. And I'll post it in Twitch chat too. So basically for ERL2, you just have to access to the same data as the API. You just have access to the same data as the API. You actually don't have the same access. You have less data if you have the API. The big thing ERL2 gets you though is TR experience, and a lot of the ERL teams like LFL2 are really good. And that's like the ERL2 experience you're gonna get is basically just like proving yourself. Like what Mab said, how do you mark yourself to teams? Just do good work, especially in ERL2 or like I'd say NACL as well. But NACL, you have access to a lot more data. So yeah, I don't think there's like, you don't really get access to great data until, or actionable data until ERL1. But you can still use like Riot API to get like player stats like here. There's a lot more below this, but this is all using Stoicky data, so Riot API data. And like this as well, this is something that doesn't use grid, so you can also use something like this. It just requires a lot more manual work in the lower ERLs, lower leagues. But yeah, it's 6:40, so I'm gonna end it there. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something. And I hope to see you build stuff as well. Again, I'm always willing to help anyone. So